Okay, so today we're going to try to get a handle on how it is that we're understanding the BP oil disaster in terms of natural law, okay? And so one of the things that we have to do is to get a handle on what exactly was the BP oil disaster. So BP stands for British Petroleum, and the disaster happened on April 20th, 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico. The Deepwater Horizon is the oil rig that was doing the drilling, and from what I understand, they were running behind schedule because they had some problems with some previous drilling sites that they had, and so they were already on to another drilling site that they had that they were about to cap, and they were having problems capping the oil, because basically what happens is that Deepwater Horizon, the way it usually works is Deepwater Horizon drills the oil and then they cap it, and after they cap it they have another rig come that actually takes the oil out of the ground. Okay, so Deepwater Horizon is basically the drilling aspect, and so as they were finishing up the drilling, which was giving them some problems because they were running behind schedule, after they were getting ready to cap that, they were having some problems with the capping of it, okay? And so you could understand all the pressure that they're under, and then likewise the literal pressure that's happening in terms of the oil that is being extracted is also under a lot of pressure as well, but also the scheduling pressures as well, in terms of this being, millions of dollars at stake, and every day that they're behind schedule, this costs them a lot of money. So there's a lot of pressure to keep moving forward, and to at the same time start compromising little bits of safety, etc., along the way, right? So we know that basically the drilling goes 1 mile beneath the surface of the ocean to the ocean floor, and then it even goes another 2 miles below that to get to the oil, okay? And so in other words, if you imagine 3 miles of drilling happening, this is something that is a remarkably difficult technical challenge. And so that's part of the reason why you could start understanding how there could be some difficulty, because the separation between the contact points, in other words, the surface where the oil rig is, 3 miles down, you could understand there being technical difficulties. And likewise, as I'm pointing out, there's a lot of pressure in terms of getting the crews to move faster, and then likewise there's the oil is under a lot of literal pressure as well, okay? And so understand, what do we say, this was April 20th, 2010. The very day that this happened, the oil rig was celebrating 7 years of no safety violations. Oddly enough, that very day they had high-ranking officials on the oil rig, and they were actually celebrating a 7-year absence of safety problems with the Deepwater Horizon oil rig. Okay, and so one thing that we're looking at is basically an accumulation of little safety violations that culminated to what we know of as the BP oil disaster. Okay, so I'm gonna link you to a story that I found in Slate titled "Blame BP for Deepwater Horizon, but direct your outrage for the actual mistake." And so there, the authors are pointing out a lot of little errors that lead up to the disaster. Okay, and so So what we're doing is we're basically setting up this way that we could start thinking of the specifics that lead up to the problem that take us to one of the biggest environmental problems, man-made environmental disasters that we know of, okay? And so that's setting you up. So I'm going to link you to the Slate article, and then maybe I'll link you up to a video that gives us a sense of how to place this in terms of the micro handling of this, as you will. But now let's just go back to St. Thomas Aquinas. So if we're thinking of St. Thomas Aquinas, we're thinking of St. Thomas Aquinas in terms of natural law. And so one thing that we have that I may have mentioned in the previous video, but if I didn't, is what we call synderesis. And so synderesis is a term that Aquinas uses that we want to use to accompany with the term conscientiousness, okay? So that's what we're thinking of as intuitive. That's what we're thinking of as conscientiousness. That is what we're thinking of that is innate and likewise intrinsic. And it's also keyed into reasoning as well, okay? So if we understand synderesis, we're getting this key to how it is that which is intrinsic is natural, but it's also tied into conscientiousness, and that for Aquinas is known as synderesis. So what is that, right? So we have the three, we have what's called the synderesis rule. So natural law is based on 5 primary precepts. So these 5 primary precepts are fundamental principles revealed to us by God, okay? And so these are known to us by way of reason. And if they're known to us by way of reason, we're thinking of them in terms of conscientiousness. And so in other words, this is what we tend to think of when we think of conscientious reasoning as innate and intrinsic. So in other words, we appeal to these 5 basic principles of synderesis. The first one being self-preservation or preservation of the innocent. The second one is continuation of the species through reproduction, to live in society, and to worship God. So, in other words, these are ways that Aquinas is getting us to a basic understanding that humans innately try to do good and to avoid evil in order to find fulfillment and happiness in life. So in other words, the aim toward good by way of synderesis is understood by way of these 5 rules of the synderesis principle, right? Or the synderesis rule. So in other words, if we apply that to the problems of the BP oil disaster, we see something rather interesting, right? And that's what I want to know from you. That in other words, if we're seeing the BP oil disaster as a violation of natural law, then we see there being a violation of natural law by way of the good. And if it's a violation of way of understanding this way that we're getting toward the good, how is it understood by way of violating self-preservation, preservation of the innocent? How is it in violation of the continuation of the species through reproduction? So again, how is the BP oil disaster by way of these micro mistakes that people were making in order to push the scheduling and to push the workers to have these safety violations? I guess I'm asking you, how is it that goodness is violated by way of these principles? So self-preservation, continuation of the species through reproduction, education of children, to live in society, and to worship God. So in other words, how is the BP oil disaster, through these micro avoidances of the good, how is that working by way of natural law, okay? So this is interesting because it sets us up to see that natural law is a violation of how it is that we're understanding something reasonably. And so if we're seeing it as a violation of something that's a violation of synderesis, then how is that working in terms of these 5 primary principles that Aquinas lays out in terms of how it is that we understand synderesis? Okay, so think about that and take it from there. Thanks.